Okay, welcome back. And I think that we've gone through really what the left wing, what people like Mark Lamont Hill. So it's not the entire left, but it's um, a very vocal section of the left. What they believe concerning freedom of speech. When they see freedom of speech, they believe it's freedom of speech for themselves in order to combat certain injustices that they find very important to eliminate from the world. They see it as a social crusade of theirs. Yes, I'm going to say crusade. I don't care if they think it's an offensive word. And that's basically what they end up doing. They end up going to people who there's no reason anybody should care what they have to say, but they will go to a meeting where they're not even interested in what the person has to say. They just want that person deplatformed, and that's effectively what has happened concerning Charles Murray, who I mentioned in the last video, and his speeches at certain colleges in the United States. Now, concerning this, the left is basically, they embrace the professor. This was last year, okay? So we're talking about old news. They've embraced the professor who was basically, he is a racial bigot. He's a white person who hates other white people. And he wants white people to suffer. And yet he thinks that it's objectionable that Charles Murray would be able to appear on platforms of academic studies at universities, like in this case Villanova. So let's watch his talk with Tucker Carlson.
Charles Murray, no more.
Public safety.
Anti-worker,
To go and
anti-war.
going to do it.
Charles Murray.
Well, the forces of tolerance did their best today to stop another Charles Murray event from taking place. The sociologist spoke at Villanova, but he had to be escorted out for his own safety after several people disrupted the event and called him a white supremacist. Murray returned after several people were rejected by the police. George Ciccariello-Maher is a professor at nearby Drexel University and a self-described radical political theorist. 2 days ago, he urged the disruption of Murray's speech, calling on students to, quote, make this impossible. Professor Ciccariello-Maher joins us tonight from Mexico City.
So he really, the terminology he uses, make this impossible, is very important, because he doesn't specifically say how to make it impossible. And therefore, you can make the argument that he's responsible for the arrest of those kids, because they probably did something that was in violation of a certain school code of conduct and whatever. But you'll see that, as in the previous segment, his morality is a totally different morality from everybody else, and we have to accommodate him.
Professor, thanks for coming on. I wonder if you see something inconsistent with someone who teaches at a university dedicated to the idea of the open exchange of ideas, calling for ideas he disagrees with to be shut down.
I think we should be clear that universities are actually spaces for rational ideas, for arguments that are based in fact and evidence. And the reality is that Charles Murray has never based his arguments in evidence or facts. He has never passed any kind of rigorous academic examination of those ideas. He doesn't publish with academic presses. Instead, he's actually had his research paid for by right-wing think tanks. They paid for him to write books like The Bell Curve. They paid for those books to be published, and then they actually paid for journalists to read and take seminars on those books to spread the gospel, as it were. So this is kind of the worst kind of pseudo-intellectual pay-for-play, and that doesn't guarantee you a platform on a university campus.
So I want you guys to understand what his argument is, because the wrong people funded his studies, because the wrong people published his studies, because the wrong people featured him, and because the wrong people followed him, Charles Murray does not deserve an academic platform. And I want you guys to understand that when you see a journal or a book that's been published by an academic press, that academic press does not lend it more credibility than does, for example, being self-published. Or there's people who get self-published who put together very, very decent pieces of work, very decent stuff, and they've never set foot in an academic institution. So what this person is basically saying this is the pinnacle of elitist academic thinking. Because the fact is that working class people, by his standard, would never have the right to appear on an academic platform at a university. By virtue of what he just said, he might not intend it to mean that, and I'm sure if you asked him, he would probably deny it. But by the standard that he sets, that somebody would have to be published in an academic journal, somebody would have to be peer-reviewed, all of that crap, that somebody who is a grassroots activist who never went to a college or whatever, they could never have the legitimate right to appear on a platform. Okay? And therefore, it would be at the pleasure of the university that such a person could appear. And they would, that could be revoked at any time. Now, what he's effectively saying, okay, I'm not saying that what he's saying is incorrect. I'm saying that for somebody who is on the left, somebody who's talking all the time about decolonizing institutions, which is language that he uses basically as often as he can, talking about deconstructing institutions of oppression, he is upholding the ultimate institution of oppression for the working class, which is academic ivory towers. That's basically what he's saying. It's not. I mean, he used different words, but he is calling for ivory towers of progressivism.
So because he hasn't been published in academic journals and hasn't passed through the gauntlet of other professors assessing his work, though of course he has, because he has been an academic, but by that standard, I don't know, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, none of them, I recall, publishing in academic journals. Is their writing also out of bounds on Drexel's campus?
So I think the question is really also about the content of these writings. Let's be clear. This is someone who is
so there he has to give up the ghost. He has to say, well, it's not really an issue of that. It's an issue that the things he's saying I don't like.
defined as a white nationalist by the Southern Poverty Law Center, someone who burned crosses in his youth and went on to play a role in violent counterinsurgency during the Vietnam War, and then who went on to support mass incarceration, the gutting of welfare.
Okay, let me just stop you there. Just back up one step. He burned crosses in his youth. I know Charles Murray. I know quite a bit about him. I've read his books. I'm sure, unlike you. I'm not familiar with that. Can you substantiate that claim?
Okay, well, you should have done research. It doesn't take much research to realize that this is something that happened. He claimed it wasn't racist, which might be plausible were it not for the fact that he went on to basically make a constant eugenic argument for racial inferiority through the rest of his career, arguing that black Americans and that Latinos are inferior.
I don't want to get hung up, but since we're having a debate about what is accurate and what is not, what are you talking about? Charles Murray was a member of the Klan? I mean, you can't throw these things out here. I know this is not an academic journal, but substantiate that claim, please.
Now, I mean, Tucker, I'm pretty sure you know what Google is, and I'm pretty sure you know how to do research.
So when you have people shouting Google, this is something Cenk Uygur did it in the debate with Ben Shapiro. You can't just shout out, Google it. That doesn't matter, because Googling it does not mean look for a reliable source of information with proof of the accusation you're making. Because Google can spit out all sorts of crap. The Google algorithm is known to manipulate your search results anyway. So what the fuck does that Google? I mean, I should say, what's that other one? Why don't you just Bing it, Ciccariello-Maher? Why don't you just look it up on Bing, the other search engine? Why don't you DuckDuckGo it? If the threshold for giving proof is to tell somebody else to look it up, and I have a friend who does this all the time, then you're being the lazy bitch, not the person that you're telling to Google it.
Research, and if you did that, then you would realize that this is something he's admitted to, although he claimed that it had no racial undertones. Unfortunately, as I said, he went on to write that blacks and Latinos are racially inferior, that they're genetically debased, and he's gone on more recently, actually, this might be interesting for your audience, that he's gone on more recently to actually argue that poor whites are becoming genetically inferior as well. This is someone who uses the most flimsy pseudoscience that's been debunked in every way possible, and yet people continue to take it seriously because it makes them feel better.
So look, you're saying that someone who makes racially inflammatory claims that haven't been vetted by academic the academic establishment shouldn't be allowed to speak on a college campus, and yet people have said that of you. You called on Twitter for, and I'm quoting, white genocide, obviously a racially inflammatory thing to say. People tried to shut you down, and you called those people a mob and defended academic freedom when it applied to you. How is he more racially inflammatory than you calling for white genocide?
I'm losing my faith. I'm really losing my faith in your ability to use Twitter. I mean, to use Google, because if you used Google, the first thing you would realize is that, of course, white genocide is not a real thing. It's a racial fantasy of the kind that Charles Murray and his ilk like to put forward.
So again, he uses the whole Google it thing. These people. You have to understand that George Ciccariello-Maher, I've done a couple videos way back about his bullshit. This is a person who is a full-on Marxist-Leninist, supported the Chavez regime, supported all of supported basically lock, stock, and barrel the communist takeover of all these Latin American countries, and then pretended that it wasn't falling apart. And yet he is now saying, I want you to rely on the tool of a search engine, Google, owned by a massive corporation that even people on the left now acknowledge is engaged in the censorship of some of their free speech. And he's trying to use that as the rejoinder, the response to Tucker Carlson's objection to him complaining about Charles Murray because he said things that are inflammatory himself. He's trying to say, well, because there's sources on Google that will debunk the idea of white supremacy, of white genocide, sorry. Because on Google there are sources that will say Charles Murray burned a cross, that therefore you should have done your research. No, you are being called to respond to this, Ciccariello-Maher. You're the person presenting the view. You don't call on the person who's your opponent to substantiate your claim. Otherwise, you're being a lazy academic, which is exactly what somebody who works at Drexel University as a global, whatever the fuck it is, global studies professor, which is what he used to be. That's what they would do.
And when you call forward these arguments, I'm not saying that I'm not saying they shouldn't be allowed on campus. I'm saying that they haven't earned any kind of platform on campus, and the free speech rights of those who are most affected by that racist hate speech comes into play. They're able to protest as they did today. They protested today peacefully at Villanova before they were attacked.
Nobody takes you seriously. I'm trying to take you seriously. You're accusing this guy of racial demagoguery, and you called for white genocide. You also applauded the Haitian Revolution for killing whites. Look, those are your views. I'm not saying you shouldn't be allowed to express them. I'm merely...
That's true. And during the Haitian Revolution, okay, you can say the Haitian Revolution was justified because, yes, these were slaves rebelling against their French masters. But yeah, they killed every white person that was there. So this is basically what this guy believes in. He doesn't believe in racial harmony. He doesn't believe in an integrated society. He doesn't believe in races getting along. He doesn't believe in coexistence. So in a way, he's not the opposite of Charles Murray, or the Charles Murray that he's portraying. Charles Murray he's portraying as a right-wing racial bigot who wants to subjugate the people of color. What Ciccariello-Maher is arguing for is for the subjugation and elimination of white people. So in reality, and maybe this is an exaggeration of his views, but he did say those things, and I've seen them. I'm actually blocked by him on Twitter, so I can't show you anymore. I don't know why I'm blocked by him on Twitter, but I just wanted to point that out. So. Essentially, the real problem with Ciccariello-Maher isn't that he is opposing Charles Murray on the basis that he believes in racial coexistence, whereas Charles Murray doesn't. Charles Murray has no problem with racial coexistence. It's George Ciccariello-Maher that does.
pointing out the irony that you're trafficking in race hatred and yet saying that Charles Murray shouldn't be allowed to speak because he traffics in race hatred. Are you self-aware enough to catch that?
I actually believe, I believe in a very fundamental way that all people are equal. What's very interesting and different is that Charles Murray does not, and he's dedicated his life to arguing that people are inferior and that those inferior people should not have access to education.
So what he says there is that he believes people are equal. That does not mean that he retracts his blessing towards the killing of all the white people during the Haitian Revolution. Okay, so this is a person who is, you know, he is very morally judgmental, but he knows how to parse his words and use and legally out himself from whatever issue he thinks could be created by saying, well, in reality, I'm the person who agrees, who believes in equality. He never addresses the fact that he believes in racial violence too.
Should not have access to social
I think he's
welfare.
argued for genocide.
Out of higher education.
Okay, right. I doubt you've read a Charles Murray book, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Supported by.
Okay, but answer my question. You called for white genocide, and I'm not making it up. It actually got a lot of attention. Are you going to defend that as a principled academic stand? I mean, what does that mean exactly? And
I really, maybe I gave you too much credit. Maybe I thought you were too smart. Maybe I thought that you would actually do your research and figure out, for example, what is satire, what's clearly satire, what talks about an imaginary concept of white genocide, which is upheld by the likes of.
So now he wants to use the line, well, I was trying to satirize what the alt-right is saying about white genocide. No, you can't. The way that this person is trying to enforce rules in terms of speech towards Charles Murray and saying, well, we should try to get his thing canceled. We should try to force him not to appear on these college campuses. You don't get to then say, well, when I was saying this about white genocide, it was basically satire. No, you can. You have to realize that there's a difference between saying something publicly, verbally when you're speaking in front of an audience, and putting something on Twitter where people, Twitter doesn't have a sarcasm detector. Okay, people who know this person, know his history, know his train of thought, know basically by I have some of these Christian friends who are like, you shall know them by their fruits. Well, what are the fruits that he produces? He produces racial animus towards white people. That's what George. And if, by the way, if he was saying the same thing, if he was calling for genocide against Mexicans, I think he would be wrong too. Okay, I think that this person is, it's sickening that somebody like this taught at Drexel. Now he's teaching at NYU, by the way.
Steve Bannon and all these alt-right figureheads who actually think that white people in the United States are under existential threat. I do not believe that.
Okay. So here's something that I don't even understand the answer, but I'm going to pass on to something you said just a couple days ago, and this is on your Twitter account. You said, some guy gave up his first-class seat for a uniformed soldier. People are thanking him. I'm trying not to vomit or yell about Mosul. Was that satire too? What does that mean? Or are you going to blame Steve Bannon for that as well?
I think it's really irresponsible to blindly support, for example, wars that send off young people into combat, risk their lives, kill many others, as we've just seen in Mosul, 200 people incinerated by U.S. bombs, and to not do that in a way that expands anyone's freedom, that makes anyone less secure. The Iraq War
but
has
you're
not
blaming
freedom.
The soldier. You're not blaming the policymakers.
Oh,
you're saying
not.
You're saying giving up a seat for a soldier in uniform made you want to vomit. You're not saying giving up a seat for the guy who made the war policy, but for the soldier, the guy who's risking his life. Why'd that make you feel like throwing up?
I think U.S. troops need real support. They don't need symbolic gestures. What they need is not a first-class.
So that's a bullshit. Response, because the person giving up their seat, you don't know if they're a medical professional. You don't know if they're a psychologist. You don't know if they're if they're an academic advisor or anything. So what the fuck do you have a problem with? And that's exactly what Carlson will say in the end.
See, what they need is healthcare support, psychological support. Women in uniform need to not be subjected to an epidemic of sexual assault. And more than anything, they don't.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with somebody giving up their seat to a guy on a plane happens to be a soldier.
Need to be deployed, have their lives risked, be taken away from their families for wars that do nothing and no good for anyone.
But why is it bad to get, okay, that's fine, but why is it bad to give him a first-class seat? I'm missing that. Someone's trying to be nice to the guy who's going through all these hardships you just described, and that makes you mad. Why?
I'm all for generous gestures devoted toward those who most deserve them in our society, and I have the deepest respect for anyone who, particularly for economic reasons, makes difficult decisions, whether it's joining the military, whether it's, doing other dangerous work that has to take place in our society, whether it's being an economic migrant. And I think these people all deserve better. They deserve to not have to join the military if they would rather just get an education.
But he did. He doesn't have a government-subsidized job at a university like.
So think about that. He's saying I feel like vomiting because this person has to join the military. Okay, then I would say I would like to vomit because people have to listen to you in a classroom. People who have signed up, paid money through their or taken loans out in order to pay your fucking salary, that they have to sit through your garbage and listen to you pontificate about why you think that a woman who gave up her seat for a soldier, why you think that that's nauseating to you.
So returning to not have the health care and the psychological support that they need. This is how we support the troops, not by sending them off into wars.
Okay. So you began this conversation with reference to your own scholarship and the academic journals that you and your fellow professors publish in. And because I do want to take you seriously, I actually spent some time reading some of them today. And I want you to explain to me what this means. Now, I was an editor for a long time, not an academic press, but an editor. You wrote a piece called Dual Power in the Venezuelan Revolution. This is the second paragraph, and I'm quoting it. By viewing the process through the Leninist concept of dual power, that is the construction of an autonomous alternative power capable of challenging the existing state structure, we can see that the establishment of communal councils in Venezuela is clearly a positive step toward the development of fuller and deeper democracy, which is encouraging in and of itself. Now, that's a sentence with too many adjectives, a passive construction, imprecise language. It's high school writing. It's crap. And I'm wondering, is your scholarship serious?
I really appreciate you digging into the vault. I appreciate you digging into the vault to actually closely read some of my
You're not an impressive scholar.
So I think Carlson was using, this is a kind of gonzo tactic. And I don't know if you can blame Ciccariello-Maher for reacting. You can see their faces, but when I can actually explain what that means, okay? And it actually does mean that this guy is basically some sort of fanatic, okay? So Carlson pretends that it's not clear enough. In reality, this is what it means. Dual power is something that communist and fascistic regimes use in order to basically wipe out what democracy really is in our sense, in most of the democratic countries throughout the world, which is this: you create parallel institutions, you create let's say parallel police, parallel military. So you create just like the Soviets created the KGB and the Cheka, they created the Red Guards in China, the Nazis created the SS. The Chavez had created, the popular councils, I think they were called. You had Gaddafi had structures like that. In a totalitarian regime, you try to create parallel structures of government, parallel structures of society that are loyal to your group. Okay, it happens in dictatorial regimes throughout the world. They could be right-leaning, they could be left-leaning. But that's the way that they do it. And in his mind, in the mind of somebody like Ciccariello-Maher, that's a good thing as long as they propose progressive ideas. If they start to propose things that he deems to be not progressive for whatever arbitrary reason he wants, then they become evil. But the action of creating a parallel government and a parallel systems of power are in his mind positive, because that makes it impossible for those the traditional institutions, the Parliament of Venezuela, for example, from being able to swing back into the hands of the people who might oppose his revolution. That's exactly what happened with Ciccariello-Maher's example of Venezuela. I believe it was 2015, Venezuela's parliament, I think it's called the Congress, was it was taken over by the opposition to Maduro, and they were, I think they almost had a supermajority. And what Maduro ended up doing was creating a constitutional assembly that would basically invalidate everything that the parliament would do. And since he'd excuse me, since the Venezuelan government under Maduro had already packed the Supreme Court, which is something people on the left want to do here, there was nothing to stop him from basically declaring almost absolute power there. So yeah, Venezuela has a parliament right now that has an opposition majority, but it's powerless. They can't do anything because their laws are unenforceable. Because when the executive branch basically defangs defangs them, creates a parallel system of government, which is exactly what Ciccariello-Maher is doing, then those elections don't mean shit. Basically, Venezuela has become a one-party state with a system of government that is dominated by the executive branch. And he thinks it's a good thing.
That's what I'm saying. You're a performance artist. That's not impressive.
That's shown himself unable to use Google today. This is really interesting.
No,
I've got 3 books.
What does that mean? I just read.
I don't need to flout academic credentials in front of you.
But you don't. You're not capable of writing a clear sentence. Now, I went through a lot of different essays that you wrote, and I've got an IQ above room temperature, and I couldn't understand any of them because your writing is childlike. It's childlike. And I'm wondering,
as though your entire
can you explain what that
you're
means?
Incapable of grasping very simple and very basic things.
Okay,
I've done
so what is
studies on popular power in Venezuela, on the development of what are called communal councils. I know them better than most, and I know what it means to develop these participatory institutions of democracy in Venezuela. I'm glad to talk about them. But if your entire shtick is to come on here and say that you can't understand basic English and basic sentences, I'm really not sure where to start.
But it's not basic English. I've spent a lot of time writing and editing basic English, and it's designed to make the idea clearer, not to cloak them from people. So 2 things are going on. Either you don't really know what you're saying because you don't understand it yourself, or you're trying to hide it from the person for whom you're writing. And neither one is impressive. And I guess my point is the only writing I have read by you that I can understand clearly are your tweets, and they seem to be designed to shock people, to get attention. It seems, again, a species of performance art, not scholarship. Has this occurred to you?
I mean, performance art is scholarship. Let's be real about that. But you seem to.
Okay, I think that they're both bullshitting here. I think, yeah, would I like academic journals to publish stuff that's a little more accessible to the general public? Sure. I don't think it's always possible. Sometimes you when you're having like a very theoretical, high-minded discussion that pertains to a particular area, sure, I mean, there's a lot of academic or even specific professional jargon that has to be used. I think in the terms of political science, though, when you publish something that is thick with a lot of academic jargon, then you're basically accepting that this is something that's to be studied by political scientists. It's not to be studied by the general public. So you're not a populist. You're not a populist. You are an ivory tower dweller. So he has a point there. What the other guy's saying, what George Meyer is saying is, well, performance art is fine in academia, and you know, to a certain extent he's right, but I don't think that they're co-equal. I don't think that they're the same thing. So I think, you know, Tucker Carlson is trying to say, well, why is it so hard for the average person to understand what you're saying? I think that's a criticism that, you know, it's still academia, but the fact is that for this guy to defend his writing as easy to understand is ridiculous, because he's making the argument from the beginning that Charles Murray does not pass the bar in order to be considered a serious academic, in order to really earn a spot to speak at Villanova or Penn or wherever it is. And that's why you cannot consider yourself to be a man of the people, of the working class, if you think that it's dependent on your academic credentials whether you deserve to have a platform or not. And then, he also segued into saying, well, really it's his views that are the problem.
To be able to understand the very short pieces that I write, and yet when you sit down to try to read the longer things, you suddenly want to perform your own inability to actually read and to digest. Plenty of people have read my work, they appreciate it, and yet you're here defending someone like Charles Murray, who very few people defend, who is a
I'm not defending Charles Murray. I'm defending
about them. We're here talking about.
I'm defending his right to say what he thinks. And I think that underpins all scholarship, is the right of people to say what they believe. We call it free speech. It's enshrined in the Bill of Rights, in the First Amendment to that bill. So I'm just surprised that you're not.
We've already explained what his belief is about the freedom of speech, but I don't think he never really articulates it here, but let's see the rest of this.
For that, but then I guess I shouldn't be, because you defend Hugo Chavez. But let me just ask you one final question. If your tweet...
Now, at no point in the First Amendment does it say that no one should use their free speech to protest. And I think you know that perfectly well.
No, but it's not a question of protesting.
At no point does it say that free speech should not be loud, it should not be disruptive, it should not be unruly. These are things that have a long and venerated tradition in the United States.
And I'm not against protest, as you know.
Free speech is very different.
Protesting, Professor. You're trying to prevent a man...
platform.
Silly. You're trying to prevent him from saying what he thinks.
Right-wing think tanks.
Okay. Last question. The tweet that you're unwilling to defend about feeling nauseous as you see a man in uniform getting a first-class seat, you protected that. You prevented the public from seeing that right after you tweeted it. If you're proud of what you think and you can defend what you think, why did you do that?
I believe absolutely in the right of people to use these platforms. I believe in the right of Charles Murray, of course, to take to Twitter and to say, to spew his kind of violent racism. But that doesn't mean that he should be invited onto a university campus to do so.
I'm sorry. I don't have a lot of time. I just want you to answer my question.
Those people that he says are inferior, he says are inferior have every right to protest to him, to take to the streets, to demand that he not be able to speak.
But you're not answering my question.
As human
you're
beings.
going on
He's saying
racism,
that they're
racism,
inferior.
Okay.
Yes.
I got it.
It's racism.
Are you going to answer my question?
If you don't want to recognize Charles Murray as a racist,
why are you protecting your Twitter feed
unfortunately?
If you can defend your position? Why are you hiding it from the public?
Sometimes you need to protect your Twitter feed when people who like to go on and on about free speech decide that it's time to violently threaten people who are using that free speech. I would not violently threaten a Charles Murray
It's the man who called for white genocide.
And yet,
you didn't major in irony, I can see, Professor.
Right to go speak at Villanova.
I gotta go.
Yeah, I don't think that this was a respectful discussion on either side, but I think Tucker Carlson's show is, that's the way it is. If you would have this guy on to debate somebody, he wouldn't take the debate seriously, because after all, he does say Google it. When you say Google it, you've automatically conceded that you can't defend your position because you're trusting the other person to do the research to prove your point. You're trusting the other person to do the research to erode their own claim. And the fact is that that's not what a debate is. Okay, it could be, if somebody was to write a paper on that, that could be...